The evening was supposed to be a celebration. I had put on my cleanest white dress that morning, ironed it carefully, and smoothed out the creases as though doing so could also flatten the wrinkles of my 62-year-old face. My granddaughter, Lila, was turning 16, and the entire family was gathering for her birthday party at my daughter's house. I arrived early, clutching the small box of perfume I had bought her with my modest savings. The scent wasn't expensive, but it was delicate and sweet, the kind I thought a young girl would appreciate. The living room was filled with laughter, chatter, and the kind of easy noise that comes when people feel at home. But I did not feel at home. I never really did in my daughter Marin's house. Still, I tried to smile, tried to fit myself into the corners of their world without becoming a burden. The moment came suddenly, sharp and humiliating. Lila was holding a tall glass of grape juice, the kind that stained instantly. She looked me up and down, her eyes flicking over my dress. Then, with a mischievous grin, or maybe it was something harsher, she tilted her hand, and the dark liquid splashed across my chest and face. The room went silent for a heartbeat. Then came the laughter. Not nervous, not apologetic, laughter. My son-in-law chuckled, my daughter smirked, even the neighbors who had gathered shook their heads with thinly veiled amusement. "Oops," Lila said, not sounding sorry at all. "Nobody wants you here, old woman." Her words sliced deeper than the juice could ever stain. I stood there frozen, my hands trembling around the small box of perfume. My dress clung to me, sticky and ruined. The sweet smell of grapes mixed with my humiliation until I could hardly breathe. I could have shouted, I could have defended myself. But instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and set the gift on the table. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house. The night air was cool, almost kind, as though the world outside was apologizing for what had just happened. I walked the 3 blocks back to the tiny apartment I rented in the center of town, each step echoing the words that replayed in my mind, "Nobody wants you here." When I reached my building, I climbed the narrow staircase to the 2nd floor, unlocked my door, and stepped inside. The silence of my apartment wrapped around me, stark and heavy. I sat down in the old wooden chair by the window and pressed my hands to my face. For the first time in years, I let the tears come. The next morning, I woke early, though I hadn't slept much. My small apartment overlooked the old cobblestone streets of Brighton, a coastal town in southern England. From my window, I could see the sea glittering in the distance, hear the gulls calling over the rooftops. It should have been beautiful, but my heart felt heavy. I busied myself with chores, washing dishes, sweeping the floor, watering the little fern that grew stubbornly in its pot, but my mind kept circling back to last night. My daughter's silence as her child humiliated me. The laughter. The way no one had stood up for me. I thought of calling Marin, demanding an apology, but what good would that do? She had made her feelings clear over the years. To her, I was a relic of the past, a burden she tolerated only because society told her she should. She never said it aloud, but I could see it in her eyes every time she asked for just a little help with money or babysitting. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted from the weight of it all. I brewed myself a cup of tea, sat in the same wooden chair by the window, and stared out at the sea. That was when my phone rang. The sharp sound startled me, and when I saw Marin's name flash on the screen, my stomach clenched. My first thought was that she was calling to scold me, for leaving the party, for embarrassing her somehow. Reluctantly, I answered. Her voice was trembling. "Mum," she said, without preamble. "You need to come. Something's happened." When I arrived at her house an hour later, the atmosphere was nothing like the night before. The laughter was gone. The house felt heavy, as though the air itself had thickened. "What is it?" I asked. Marin's face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She gestured toward the living room, where Lila sat curled up on the sofa, her face buried in her knees. "There was an accident," Marin whispered. "She was out with her friends last night after the party. They got into a car crash. No one was killed, thank God, but Lila." She trailed off, biting her lip. My granddaughter lifted her head then, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. The arrogance, the cruelty. It was gone, replaced by something fragile. "They said I can't play sports anymore," she whispered. "My knees ruined. Forever." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken grief. I felt the strangest mix of emotions. Sympathy, yes. She was still a child, and this was a cruel blow. But also something else. A quiet, undeniable sense that life had shifted, that the ground beneath their feet was no longer solid. The same ground from which they had mocked me just 3 nights earlier. For a long time, I stood there without speaking. Then I moved closer, sat on the edge of the sofa, and placed a hand on Lila's trembling shoulder. She flinched at first, but then leaned into me, just slightly, like a wounded bird. And in that moment, I understood, life had given me back a strange kind of power. Not through revenge or anger, but through patience. Through silence. Because when the ground disappears beneath others, they reach for something steady. And I, the unwanted old woman, was steady. That night, back in my apartment, I sat again by the window. The sea shimmered under the moonlight, and the gulls cried in the distance. My heart still ached from the humiliation, but now it beat with something new as well, a strange, unshakable strength. I whispered to myself, this isn't the end. It's the beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The days following Lila's accident blurred into one another. Maren called me often, her voice thinner than usual, tinged with worry. At first, I thought it was guilt that made her reach out, guilt over how she had let her daughter humiliate me at the party. But the truth, I realized, was simpler. She needed me. Lila's knee was in a brace, her movements awkward and painful. Physical therapy appointments filled their schedules, and suddenly my presence, once a nuisance, became useful. Could you come sit with her while I run errands? Maren would ask. Or, Mum, can you make sure she takes her medication on time? And every time, though a part of me hesitated, I said yes. I would arrive at their house in the mornings, the smell of stale coffee lingering in the kitchen, and sit with my granddaughter while she scrolled through her phone, her leg propped up with pillows. At first, she barely acknowledged me. The bright, cruel girl from the party seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone quieter, more brittle. Sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, I saw tears pooling in her eyes. You'll heal, I told her gently one afternoon. The body is remarkable. It can surprise us. She looked at me then, her eyes sharp. They said it's permanent. I'll never run again. I'll never play volleyball. That was my life, Gran. It's over. Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't argue. I only reached over and squeezed her hand. She didn't pull away. One evening, after a long day at their house, I returned to my apartment to find an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a note from my landlord. Rent increase effective next month. Additional £150 required. My chest tightened as I read the words. I was already scraping by on my pension and the small bit I earned working part-time at the public library. An increase like this would tip me over the edge. I sat at the table, the note spread out before me, and did the maths over and over. There was no way. Not unless I found another income stream, or gave up food or heat, or something essential. The thought of asking Maren for help flickered through my mind, but I dismissed it instantly. I had spent years bailing her out, handing over bits of my savings whenever she asked, even dipping into money I had set aside for emergencies. The one time I needed her, she would not be there. No, I thought. I cannot lean on her. But what could I do? At 62, the world did not welcome women like me with open arms. The job market belonged to the young, the energetic, the technologically savvy. Not to someone who ironed her only good dress and prayed it wouldn't stain. I felt the familiar weight of despair pressing down, heavy and suffocating. The next morning, while I was shelving books at the library, I overheard a group of young women chatting near the front desk. They were university students, animated and full of energy, speaking about the new cafe opening on the seafront. They're looking for staff, one of them said. Baristas, servers, part-time, full-time. Even management if you've got experience. I paused mid-shelf, the words ringing in my ears. Could I? It had been years since I worked outside the library, and I had no experience in cafes. But something stirred in me, a tiny spark of possibility. Perhaps I could learn. Perhaps there was still space for me to carve out a life that didn't depend on my daughter's whims. That evening, I stood by my window, staring out at the sea. I thought about the grape juice stain, about the laughter that had followed. I thought about the accident, about my granddaughter's tears. And I thought about the landlord's note, sitting on my table like a ticking clock. A voice inside me whispered, "It's time." The following week, I gathered my courage and walked into the cafe on the seafront. It was called Harbor Lights, a cheerful place with pastel walls and wide windows that looked out at the glittering water. The scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries enveloped me as I stepped inside. A woman in her 40s greeted me at the counter. She had kind eyes and a welcoming smile. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "I heard you're hiring. I'd like to apply." She looked me up and down, perhaps noting my age, my simple clothes. But instead of dismissing me, she nodded. "Of course. Do you have experience?" "Not in a cafe," I admitted. "But I've worked in a library for years. I'm good with people. I'm reliable. And I'm willing to learn." Her smile widened. "That's what we like to hear. Fill out this form, and we'll see what we can do." I took the clipboard she handed me, my hands trembling slightly. As I filled out the form, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. When I told Marin about the cafe, she frowned. "Mum, why would you do that? You're too old to be on your feet all day. And you don't need the money, we'll figure something out." I looked at her steadily. "No, Marin. I do need the money. And more than that, I need something of my own. Something that doesn't come from you." She stared at me, surprised. Perhaps it was the first time she'd heard me speak with such firmness. "I won't be a burden anymore," I added quietly. She didn't argue further, but I could see the confusion in her eyes, as though she were seeing me not as her mother, but as someone else entirely, someone she hadn't expected. The trial shift at Harbor Lights came a week later. I wore a plain black dress and tied my hair back, my nerves buzzing like static under my skin. The manager, whose name was Claire, showed me how to work the espresso machine, how to steam milk, how to take orders without letting the queue overwhelm me. At first, I fumbled. The buttons on the machine seemed endless, the names of the drinks confusing. But Claire was patient, guiding me with calm words and a steady hand. "You'll get the hang of it," she assured me. "It's just practice." By the end of the day, I was exhausted, my feet aching, my back sore. But I was also exhilarated. For the first time in years, I felt useful, not because someone demanded it of me, not because I had no choice, but because I had chosen this. That night, when I returned to my apartment, I sat by the window and looked out at the sea. The horizon stretched wide and endless, the waves crashing steady and sure. I thought of the party, the stain, the humiliation. I thought of the accident, the fracture it had caused in my granddaughter's life. And I thought of the cafe, the beginning of something new. For the first time in a long time, I whispered to myself, "I can do this." And I believed it. The bell above the cafe door jingled as I stepped inside for my second shift at Harbor Lights. The morning light poured through the wide windows, gilding the wooden tables in gold. The air smelled of roasted beans and warm croissants. I inhaled deeply, feeling a nervous excitement flutter in my chest. Claire, the manager, greeted me with her usual kind smile. "Morning, Eleanor. Ready for round 2?" I nodded, though my stomach was twisting. "Ready as I'll ever be." She handed me an apron, navy blue with the cafe's name stitched across the front. As I tied it around my waist, I caught my reflection in the mirror behind the counter. My hair was neatly pinned, my face lined but alert. I didn't look like a grandmother or a cast-off. I looked like someone with purpose. The first customers trickled in slowly, a young mother with a pram, a businessman clutching his phone, an elderly couple who ordered tea and scones. I fumbled at times, mixed up orders, spilled milk, but Claire never lost patience. "Breathe, Eleanor," she said gently when I panicked over a complicated coffee order. "It's just a drink, not life or death. Smile, and the rest will follow." I forced a smile, and sure enough, the customer smiled back, softening the moment. By midday, the cafe was buzzing. The hum of conversation mingled with the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups, the shuffle of chairs. I moved more confidently now, learning the rhythm. Take the order, repeat it back, press the right buttons, deliver with care. A young man with curly hair leaned across the counter at one point. "First week?" he asked with a grin. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, laughing nervously. He nodded. "You're doing fine. Better than I would." The warmth in his voice settled some of my nerves. For years, I had been invisible. An old woman tolerated at family gatherings, ignored in shops, passed over on buses. But here, in this cafe, I was seen. That evening, after the shift, Claire called me into the office. My heart sank. I thought she might be about to tell me it wasn't working out. Instead, she said, "You're doing really well, Eleanor. You've got a calmness about you that customers appreciate. I'd like to keep you on. Part-time to start, but we'll see where it goes." Tears stung my eyes. "Thank you. Truly." She waved a hand as though it were nothing, but I could tell she meant it. Walking home along the seafront, the breeze cool against my face, I felt a lightness in my step I hadn't known in years. The gulls wheeled overhead, the waves crashed steady against the shore, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of possibility. Marin didn't share my excitement. Part-time cafe work? She scoffed when I told her later that week. "Mum, that's hardly worth your energy. You should be resting at your age, not running around with trays of coffee." "I like it," I said firmly. "It makes me feel useful." "You're useful here, with us," she retorted. "Lila still needs care. I can't believe you'd rather serve strangers than spend more time with your own family." Her words cut, but I held my ground. I've spent years giving everything I had to this family. I'm not abandoning anyone, but I need something that's mine. Surely you can understand that. Marin stared at me as though I were speaking another language. Finally, she shook her head. "Do what you want, Mum. You always will anyway." But the bitterness in her voice told me she did not approve. Despite her disapproval, I threw myself into the cafe work. The routines became familiar, setting out pastries in the morning, greeting regulars, learning the quirks of the espresso machine. My confidence grew with each shift. One morning, as I wiped down a table, I overheard two women chatting by the window. "Eleanor's such a lovely addition," one of them said. "She reminds me of my mum. Always so patient." A warmth bloomed in my chest. They weren't laughing at me here. They valued me. Lila, meanwhile, was retreating deeper into herself. When I visited, she barely spoke, her phone glued to her hand. Her friends had stopped visiting after the accident, their teenage lives moving forward while hers stood still. One afternoon, I sat beside her and said softly, "You're allowed to grieve, Lila. Losing something you love hurts. But it doesn't mean life is over. It just means it will look different." She didn't answer, but her eyes flicked toward me briefly, a flicker of acknowledgement. Later that evening, Marin cornered me in the kitchen. "Stop filling her head with false hope. She'll never be the same again. She needs to accept it." I looked at my daughter, the child I had once rocked to sleep, and wondered when her heart had hardened so. "She needs love, Marin. Not resignation." Marin sighed, exasperated, as though I were naive. But I knew better. I had been broken before, and I had learned that healing often comes from the most unexpected places. Weeks passed, and I found myself slowly becoming part of the Harbor Lights family. There was Claire, always steady, Jason, the curly-haired university student who worked weekends, and Fatima, a young mother juggling shifts with childcare, her laughter filling the kitchen even on the hardest days. They welcomed me as though I belonged. One afternoon, after a particularly busy lunch rush, Jason handed me a cappuccino he had made just right. "You looked like you needed this," he said. I accepted the cup gratefully. "You're very kind." He shrugged. "You remind me of my gran. She raised me after my dad left. Strongest woman I know." I swallowed hard, touched by the comparison. For so long, I had felt like the weakest in my own family. But perhaps strength wasn't about being recognized by them. Perhaps it was about standing steady, even when no one else saw. The rent increase still loomed, and my cafe wages weren't enough yet to cover the difference. But instead of despair, I now felt determination. If I couldn't manage with this job alone, maybe there were other ways. Maybe Harbor Lights was just the beginning. One evening, as I locked up with Claire, I found myself lingering by the door. "Claire," I asked, hesitating, "how did you start all this?" "The cafe, I mean." She looked at the space around us, the polished tables, the warm glow of the lamps. A soft smile touched her lips. "I was tired of working for others. I wanted something of my own. So I saved, I planned, and I took the risk. It wasn't easy. Still isn't. But it's mine." Her words echoed in my mind long after I walked home. Something of my own. Was it too late for me? Could I, too, build something that didn't depend on scraps from others, something that was wholly mine? That night, I lay awake listening to the waves crashing against the Brighton shore. The question circled in my mind, not as a torment, but as a seed. Perhaps it wasn't too late after all. The sea was restless that morning, waves rolling and crashing against the Brighton shore with a rhythm that mirrored my own unsettled heart. I stood on the promenade, watching gulls wheel overhead, a paper cup of coffee warming my hands. It was my day off from Harbor Lights, but I found myself drawn to the water, needing its steady roar to drown out the noise of my thoughts. Claire's words replayed in my mind. I wanted something of my own. Something of my own. For 62 years, my life had been woven around others. My husband when he was alive, my daughter when she needed help, my granddaughter when she cried out for attention. Even my small apartment was not truly mine, at the mercy of a landlord who could demand more money whenever he pleased. The idea that I could still build something new at this age both thrilled and terrified me. What could I, a woman with no savings, little formal education, and a body that tired more easily than it once did, possibly create? And yet, the cafe had lit something inside me. The smell of fresh bread, the clink of cups, the laughter of customers. It was life. Real life. Not the stale, shrinking existence I had been living before. I sipped the last of my coffee and whispered into the salt-streaked air, "It's not too late." Back at the cafe, I began asking questions. Not all at once, carefully, quietly, as though afraid the dream might vanish if I spoke too boldly. "How much flour do we go through in a week?" I asked Fatima one morning as she kneaded dough. "Too much." She laughed. "Claire orders 50-kilo sacks. They don't last long." "How do you decide prices?" I asked Jason another day as he tallied receipts. "Claire checks what other cafes are charging and keeps it just under. People love a bargain." Piece by piece, I gathered little fragments of knowledge, storing them away like pebbles in my pocket. Claire noticed, of course. One evening, as we wiped down tables after closing, she raised an eyebrow at me. "You've been curious lately. Thinking of opening your own place?" I nearly dropped the cloth in my hand. "Oh heavens no. I couldn't possibly." But my voice wavered, betraying me. Claire chuckled softly. "Never say never. Life's too short to count yourself out." At home, I began sketching ideas in an old notebook I found in a drawer. At first, it was only idle dreaming, a cozy tea room with lace curtains, a shelf of second-hand books in the corner, the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting through the air. I scribbled names across the top of the page. Seabreeze Cafe, Eleanor's Corner, the Tea Nest. None felt quite right, but the act of writing them down made the dream feel less impossible. I kept the notebook hidden, though. If Marin saw it, she would only laugh. Her disapproval had grown sharper in recent weeks. "Why are you wasting your energy on that cafe?" she demanded one afternoon when I stopped by to check on Lila. "You should be here more. Lila needs you." I looked at my granddaughter, slouched on the sofa with her injured leg stretched out, scrolling listlessly on her phone. She barely looked up when I entered the room. "I am here," I said gently. "But I can't be here every moment, Marin. She needs more than me hovering over her. She needs to find her own strength too." Marin's eyes flashed. "Don't lecture me on raising my child." "I'm not," I replied softly. "I'm only saying she'll heal best if she believes in herself. You can't do that for her." The tension between us hung thick in the air. For the first time in my life, I did not back down. One Saturday evening, after a long shift, Claire invited the staff to stay for a meal. We gathered around one of the large wooden tables, plates piled with pasta, laughter filling the cafe. As I listened to Jason's jokes and Fatima's stories about her children, I felt something shift inside me. These people were not my family by blood, yet they treated me with warmth, with respect. They didn't see me as an obligation or a relic. They saw me as Eleanor. Claire poured me a glass of wine and said, "You know, you have a natural way with people. Customers love you." I flushed. "I only try to be kind." "That's rarer than you think," she replied. Then, leaning closer, she added, "If you ever wanted to try something on your own, I'd help however I could." Her words stunned me. Could I? The dream that had been flickering faintly in the pages of my notebook now burned brighter. The next day, I walked through Brighton's side streets with new eyes. I noticed empty shopfronts, the smell of bakeries, the way people lingered outside cafes with takeaway cups. I studied the flow of pedestrians, wondering where they stopped, what drew them in. An old corner shop on Wellington Road caught my attention. Its windows were dusty, its sign faded, but the location was perfect, near the bus stop, with sunlight streaming through in the afternoons. I stood outside, my heart pounding, imagining lace curtains, a bookshelf, the murmur of conversation. I laughed at myself then, shaking my head. It was absurd. I had no money, no plan. But the vision clung to me stubbornly, like the grape juice stain on my dress that still lingered faintly no matter how many times I washed it. At home that night, I opened my notebook again and began writing in earnest. Costs, ideas for menus, notes on suppliers. I even drew a little floor plan of the shop on Wellington Road. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the moon hung high over the sea. For the first time in years, I was not consumed by sorrow or fear. I was consumed by possibility. Meanwhile, Lila's mood was shifting too. She still mourned her lost volleyball career, but occasionally, I caught glimpses of the lively girl she once was. One evening, she surprised me by asking, "Gran, what's it like working in a cafe?" I blinked. "Busy. Messy. Wonderful. Why do you ask?" She shrugged, her cheeks pink. "I don't know. Maybe I could help. You know, once my leg gets better." The words caught in my throat. She had never asked about my life before, never shown the slightest interest. I smiled gently. "Maybe you could. You'd be good at it. People would love your energy." For the first time since her accident, her eyes sparkled with a hint of hope. But Marin was less moved. When she overheard us, she snapped, "Don't put silly ideas in her head, Mum. She needs to focus on school, not on cafes." Lila rolled her eyes. "Mum, it's just a thought. Relax." For once, she defended me. I bit back a smile, hiding my small triumph. The rent deadline loomed closer. My cafe wages covered most of it, but not the increase. I considered selling some of my belongings, my grandmother's brooch, the old oak table, but something inside me resisted. Those were remnants of a life already stripped thin. I would not give them up. Instead, I resolved to fight for something new. I spoke to Claire one evening after closing. "Do you think it's foolish for someone my age to dream about starting over?" She leaned back in her chair, studying me with thoughtful eyes. "Foolish? No. Brave, yes. Most people your age are too afraid to try. But Eleanor, you have something they don't. You've lived, you've endured. That gives you grit. Don't underestimate it." Her words settled deep into my bones. That night, as I sat by my window, notebook open on my lap, the waves crashing beyond, I realized something. This wasn't just about money or rent. It wasn't even about proving my family wrong. It was about reclaiming myself. I had been dismissed, humiliated, overlooked. But I was still here. And I was not done yet. I pressed my pen to the page and wrote 3 words in bold letters. The Seaside Nook. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a beginning. The sign on the empty shop window was weather-beaten but still legible, "For lease, inquire within." I stood in front of the corner shop on Wellington Road again, clutching my notebook like a lifeline. My heart thudded in my chest. Passers-by hurried past, umbrellas angled against the drizzle, but I remained rooted to the pavement, staring at the dusty glass. Inside, I could see bare shelves, peeling paint, and a floor that had once been bright but was now dulled by years of footsteps. Most would see decay. But I saw tables and chairs, curtains fluttering in the afternoon sun, the smell of fresh scones wafting into the street. Taking a shaky breath, I pushed the door open. The air smelled of dust and neglect. A man in a tweed jacket sat behind a makeshift desk. He looked up from his newspaper with mild surprise. "Help you?" I hesitated. I'm inquiring about the lease." His eyebrows rose. "You? You're looking to rent the place?" The doubt in his tone stung, but I lifted my chin. "Yes. I'd like some information." He rummaged in a folder and handed me a sheet. "Monthly rent's on there. Needs work, mind you. It's been empty a while." I scanned the paper, my stomach dropping. The number was far higher than anything I could afford. My cafe wages wouldn't cover half of it, even if I worked full-time. Still, I forced a polite smile. "Thank you. I'll think about it." As I left, the man muttered under his breath, "At her age." He must have thought I couldn't hear, but the words carried. I walked back into the drizzle, notebook clutched tightly, my steps heavy. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the lease sheet. The numbers blurred in my vision. My dream suddenly felt foolish, childish even. Who was I to think I could start over at 62? I closed the notebook and pushed it away. But even as I tried to silence it, the vision of the cafe lingered in my mind. The laughter, the clink of cups, the warmth. I pressed my hands to my face and whispered, "Don't give up now." The next day at Harbor Lights, I worked with a heaviness in my chest. I spilled milk twice, dropped a spoon, and forgot a customer's order. Claire pulled me aside gently. "What's wrong, Eleanor?" I hesitated, then handed her the crumpled lease sheet. "I thought maybe I could, but it's impossible." She studied the numbers, then looked at me with a steady gaze. "It's not impossible. It's hard, yes. But hard isn't the same as impossible." Tears pricked my eyes. "I don't have the money, Claire. I barely manage my rent. How can I think about opening something of my own?" She laid a hand on my arm. "Dreams don't happen all at once. They start small. Maybe you don't rent a shop right away. Maybe you start from your kitchen. Bake pies, deliver to neighbors, set up a stall at the weekend market. Build slowly." Her words sank into me like rain on parched soil. Start small. Grow steady. For the first time, the dream felt less like a cliff and more like a staircase. That evening, I pulled my notebook back out and began again. This time, I sketched smaller steps. Bake at home. Sell at Saturday market. Build a following. Save. It was still daunting, but it was something I could attempt. The next morning, I rolled up my sleeves and baked my grandmother's old recipes. Apple turnovers, lemon drizzle cake, and buttery shortbread. The scent filled my small flat, wrapping me in memories of childhood kitchens and simpler days. I packaged them carefully and carried a basket to Harbor Lights, offering them to Claire and the staff. Jason took a bite of the lemon drizzle and whistled. "Eleanor, this is incredible." Fatima nodded eagerly. "You should sell these. People would queue for them." Claire smiled knowingly. "See? You've already got the first step." Encouraged, I asked Claire about the local weekend market. "Go early," she advised. "Set up a simple stall, smile, and let the baking speak for itself." So that Saturday, I found myself at Brighton Market, a folding table before me, my basket of cakes and biscuits neatly arranged. My hands shook as I placed a hand-painted sign, "The Seaside Nook, Homemade Treats by Eleanor." At first, people passed by without stopping. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. But then a woman with a child paused, sniffing the air. "Are those apple turnovers?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "Would you like to try one?" She bought two. A small beginning, but it was enough. Word spread quickly. By midday, I had sold nearly everything. Customers lingered, smiling, complimenting my bakes. A few even asked if I'd be back next week. By the time I packed up, my basket empty, my heart was full. At home that evening, I spread the small stack of earnings across my table. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and it was mine. I laughed aloud, the sound surprising me. For the first time in years, I felt not just alive but thriving. But Marin was less than pleased when she found out. "You're selling cakes in the market?" she said, her voice thick with disbelief. "Mum, this is ridiculous. You're too old to be standing around in the cold like some street vendor." I bristled. "I'm not too old, Marin. And I enjoyed it." She shook her head. "You should be thinking about retirement, not playing shopkeeper." "Maybe retirement isn't what I want," I said firmly. "Maybe I want more than waiting quietly for the years to pass." She gaped at me as though she didn't recognize me. "You're being selfish. You should be here with Lila, not chasing childish fantasies." Her words pierced me, but I stood my ground. This isn't selfish. This is survival. I've given all of myself to this family, Marin. Now, I'm giving a little back to myself. We stood in silence, the space between us heavy with unspoken hurt. It was then that Lila's voice broke in, quiet but steady. "I think it's cool, Gran." Marin and I both turned. Lila sat on the sofa, her phone forgotten for once, her eyes on me. "You're actually doing something. That's inspiring." My heart swelled. For the first time, my granddaughter saw me not as a burden, but as an example. The following weeks, I returned to the market every Saturday. Each time, the line grew a little longer. Familiar faces returned, asking for the same cakes, praising the flavors. Some even asked if I catered for birthdays or small events. I kept meticulous notes in my notebook: what sold quickly, what lingered, what people asked for. My lemon drizzle became a signature, my apple turnovers a favorite. Bit by bit, I was building something. But challenges remained. Some days I baked until midnight, my hands aching, my back sore. Supplies cost money, and not every batch sold. Rainy weekends meant fewer customers, and once, a rival vendor mocked me openly. "Granny's bake stole," he sneered. The words stung, but I smiled politely and sold out of lemon drizzle that very day. Still, doubt gnawed at me in quiet moments. Was I fooling myself? Was this just a fleeting fancy that would crumble at the first real hardship? One stormy night, after a poor market day, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my dwindling coins. Tears slipped down my cheeks. Maybe Marin was right. Maybe I was chasing shadows. But then I remembered the sparkle in Lila's eyes when she said, "You're inspiring." That alone was enough to push me on. The first true chill of autumn settled over Brighton, the kind that seeped into your bones and made the sea look steel gray instead of blue. I pulled my coat tighter as I carried 2 heavy bags of flour up the stairs to my flat. My hands ached, my knees protested, but I refused to ask for help. For weeks now, I had been juggling cafe shifts, late-night baking, and Saturday markets. My days blurred into one another, a cycle of flour dust and exhaustion. But the smile on customers' faces, the sound of coins clinking into my tin, the whispered word inspiring from Lila's lips, these kept me going. Yet beneath the rhythm of progress, a storm was brewing. The first crack came when my landlord arrived unannounced. He stood in my doorway, broad-shouldered, with a ledger tucked under his arm. "Rent's overdue," he said curtly. I blinked. "Overdue? But I paid last month." "Yes, but the increase started this month. You still owe the difference. And if it's late again, I'll have no choice but to consider other tenants." My heart dropped. The extra money I had made at the market was already swallowed by ingredients and stall fees. I didn't have enough for the new rent. "I'll get it to you," I said quietly, though panic was rising in my throat. He gave a non-committal grunt and left me standing there, clutching the edge of the doorframe. For the first time since I began this journey, I wondered if I had bitten off more than I could chew. The second crack came at Marin's house. I had stopped by with a basket of shortbread for Lila. Lila's face brightened when she saw me. "Gran, these are for me." "For you, And maybe one for your mum if she's lucky, I teased, kissing her cheek. But Marin's expression soured the moment she spotted the basket. Still wasting your time and money on this baking nonsense, I see, she muttered. Mum, Lila snapped. Don't be rude. Marin rounded on her. Don't talk back. And don't encourage her, Lila. She's running herself ragged for nothing. One bad winter and she'll lose it all. The words were a blade. I tried to stay calm. I'm not wasting my time, Marin. I'm building something that matters to me. What about what matters to us? She shot back. You're never here anymore. You used to be reliable. Now you're too busy playing shopkeeper while your granddaughter sits here struggling. Lila's voice cracked with frustration. I'm fine, Mum. Stop using me as an excuse. Gran's doing something amazing. Marin froze, stunned that her daughter had spoken against her. Then her eyes flicked to me, cold and sharp. You're turning her against me, she whispered. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. No, Marin. I'm showing her it's possible to keep going, even when life knocks you down. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Get out. The command sliced through me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I turned, placed the shortbread on the counter, and left in silence. Back in my flat, I sank into my chair, trembling. The old pain of rejection, the sting of grape juice on my face at that party, the laughter, the humiliation, flooded back. Maybe she's right, a cruel voice whispered in my head. You're too old. Too tired. Too late. I pressed my palms to my eyes, fighting tears. But then I remembered the spark in Lila's eyes, the taste of lemon drizzle on Jason's lips, the kindness in Claire's voice. I would not stop now. But life had other trials in store. The following Saturday, the market was battered by fierce winds and rain. My stall shook, my cakes grew soggy despite the coverings, and customers stayed home. By noon, I had sold almost nothing. I returned home cold, wet, and nearly empty-handed. The little money I earned barely covered the cost of ingredients. As I dried my hair with a towel, despair pressed down on me. I could not afford many more weeks like this. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind howl outside, wondering if my dream was crumbling before it even began. The next morning, at Harbor Lights, Claire noticed my red eyes and weary face. Rough market day? She asked gently. I nodded. I lost money, Claire. Maybe Marin's right. Maybe I'm chasing shadows. She leaned across the counter, her gaze firm. Shadows don't taste like your apple turnovers, Eleanor. Don't give up because of one storm. You're stronger than you think. Her faith steadied me. But the universe tested me again that afternoon. As I left the cafe, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Marin. Don't bother coming by. We don't need your cakes or your speeches. Focus on your little stall if that's what you want. But don't expect us to clap when it falls apart. The words burned. My own daughter, shutting the door further. I sat on a bench by the seafront, the waves crashing violently against the rocks, tears streaming down my cheeks. For years, I had believed my worth depended on their acceptance, on being useful, needed, wanted. But maybe my worth was mine to claim, not theirs to give. I pulled out my notebook and, with trembling hands, wrote. Obstacles. Rent too high. Market unpredictable. Family against me. Strengths. Recipes people love. Loyal customers growing. A heart that refuses to stop. The balance was fragile. But I was not broken. Days later, a surprising knock came at my door. When I opened it, Jason stood there, a box under his arm. I heard about the market storm, he said. Claire told me. I thought maybe you could use these. He opened the box to reveal stacks of takeaway containers, neatly packed. I work part-time for a delivery app, he explained. You could use this. Bake at home, I'll deliver for you. People love homemade food delivered right to their door. You'd reach more than just the Saturday crowd. I stared at him, stunned. Jason, I couldn't ask you. You're not asking, he interrupted with a grin. I'm offering. Besides, I'd rather deliver your cakes than soggy fast food. My throat tightened. This boy, barely older than my granddaughter, was offering me hope when my own daughter refused it. "Thank you," I whispered, tears brimming. That evening, I baked late into the night, filling the new containers with shortbread, turnovers, and slices of lemon drizzle. Jason arrived with his delivery bag, cheerful as ever. By morning, I had my first online orders. By evening, my kitchen was nearly bare of supplies. I laughed aloud, joy bubbling up in me. The seaside nook was not only surviving, it was growing. But even as I celebrated, the storm with Marin grew darker. A week later, she called, her voice cold and sharp. "Lila skipped her physiotherapy today. She says she wants to help you bake instead. This is your fault. You're filling her head with false hopes, distracting her from what really matters." "She's finding meaning again," I said quietly. "Can't you see that?" "What I see," Marin snapped, "is my daughter slipping further away from me. And you," her voice shook with rage, "you choosing strangers and markets over your own family." The line went dead. I stood there in my tiny kitchen, the hum of the oven in the background, my heart breaking. The seaside nook was growing. But my family was crumbling. The delivery orders for the seaside nook began to grow steadily. At first, it was only neighbors and locals. People who had tried my bakes at the market and wanted more. But soon, thanks to Jason's social media posts and word of mouth, I was delivering across Brighton. On Saturday mornings, I no longer dragged my folding table to the windswept market. Instead, I stood in my small kitchen with the oven blazing, flour dusting my apron, trays of lemon drizzle cooling on the counter. Jason came by with his insulated bag, cheerful as ever, ready to deliver. "You're trending," he said one evening, showing me his phone. "Look, seaside nook. People are posting pictures of your cakes." I blinked at the screen, overwhelmed. Me? Trending? At 62? My heart swelled. For the first time in years, I felt seen, celebrated, not as someone's grandmother or someone's burden, but as Eleanor, the baker of Brighton. But success has a way of stirring envy where love should be. I arrived at Marin's one Sunday with a basket of scones. Lila greeted me with excitement, hobbling toward me on her crutches. "Gran, everyone at school's talking about you. Someone brought your lemon drizzle to class, and they said it's the best cake they've ever had." Her cheeks glowed, her eyes sparkled. She was proud of me, her grandmother. But Marin stood in the doorway, arms folded, expression like stone. "So this is what you've been doing," she said coldly. "Turning yourself into a sideshow. Do you know what people are saying, Mum? That you're desperate. That you're too old to be working like this." I forced a steady voice. "I don't care what people say. I care that I'm building something. I care that Lila sees me trying." Marin's voice rose, sharp and bitter. "What about me? Do you know what it feels like, watching your own mother get more attention from strangers than from her own family? You bake for everyone else, but when was the last time you cooked for us?" The accusation stunned me. For years, I had cooked, cleaned, babysat, sacrificed everything. And now she painted me as selfish. Before I could reply, Lila's voice cut in, trembling with anger. "Mum, stop it. Gran's doing something amazing, and you're just jealous." The room froze. Marin's face went pale, then flushed crimson. "Jealous?" she hissed. "Of what, her crumbs and cakes?" She turned on me, eyes blazing. "You're poisoning my daughter against me." My chest ached. "No, Marin. I'm only showing her it's possible to fight for something. Something more than bitterness." Her face twisted, and she whispered words I never thought I'd hear. "Get out of our lives, Mum. For good." The silence after was heavier than any storm. Lila gasped, tears brimming in her eyes. I stood frozen, the basket of scones trembling in my hands. When I finally found my voice, it was barely a whisper. "If that's what you want." I placed the basket gently on the counter, kissed Lila's forehead, and walked out. The door closed behind me with a finality that felt like a death. Back in my flat, the grief consumed me. I collapsed into my chair, clutching my chest as though the words themselves had torn through me. For decades, My identity had been wrapped around my daughter and granddaughter. To be cast aside, banished, was a wound deeper than I could bear. I sobbed until my throat ached, until the sound of waves crashing outside blurred into nothing. But when the tears subsided, something strange remained. Beneath the pain, there was a fragile thread of clarity. I had survived their rejection before. I could survive it again. The following week, I threw myself into baking with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed. Orders piled higher than ever. Jason worked tirelessly, and soon, even small cafes in town began asking if they could stock my cakes. It should have been a triumph. But the wound of Marin's words shadowed every success. One evening, as I packed a box of shortbread, Jason noticed my distant expression. "Still thinking about your daughter?" he asked gently. I nodded. She told me to get out of her life. And maybe she meant it. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up for you, who believe in you. You've got that, Eleanor. You've got us." Tears stung my eyes again, but this time they were softer. "Thank you, Jason." A few days later, the blow fell. I arrived at the market, just to browse, not to sell, and saw another stall with a bright new banner, Marin's Homemade Treats. My daughter stood behind the table, her smile forced, her hands clumsy as she handed out samples of cookies and cakes. My knees nearly buckled. Marin, who had mocked me, belittled me, was now imitating me. I forced myself closer. The cookies looked mass-produced, the cakes hastily frosted. But the stall drew a crowd, curiosity piqued by the familiar surname on the banner. "Are you related to Eleanor?" one woman asked, biting into a cookie. Marin's lips curved in a hard smile. "Yes. I'm her daughter. Baking runs in the family, I suppose." The words pierced me like a blade. She wasn't just mocking me now, she was trying to take what I had built. I stumbled away from the market, my chest tight, fury mixing with grief. For days, I couldn't bake. I sat in my chair, staring at my oven as though it had betrayed me. What's the point? I thought bitterly. Even if I succeed, she'll just take it. Twist it. Ruin it. Orders piled up unanswered. Jason knocked on my door, worried. "You can't stop now," he urged. "People love your baking. Don't let her scare you." But I shook my head, tears streaming. "She's my daughter, Jason. I can't fight her. Not like this." He knelt beside me, his voice firm. "Then don't fight her. Outshine her. Let your work speak louder than her spite." His words stirred something deep inside me. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps the best answer wasn't to argue or compete. It was simply to be undeniable. The next morning, I rose before dawn. I tied my apron, preheated the oven, and began to bake as though my very soul depended on it. The smell of lemon, cinnamon, butter filled the flat, spilling into the hallway. By the time Jason arrived, I had trays upon trays ready, more than ever before. "That's the Eleanor I know," he said, grinning. Together, we packed and delivered, not just to customers but to local cafes, bookshops, and even a small gallery. Everywhere we went, people welcomed the bakes eagerly, praising them, asking for more. By evening, I was exhausted, but alive. Marin could mimic me, but she couldn't replace me. She couldn't take my recipes, my heart, my grit. I was Eleanor. I was the seaside nook. Yet even as I found strength again, my heart ached for Lila. I hadn't seen her since that terrible day. One evening, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, there she was, crutches and all, eyes brimming with tears. "Gran," she whispered, throwing her arms around me. "I'm sorry. Mum said awful things, but I don't care. I want to be here. With you." I held her tight, my tears soaking her hair. "Oh, my darling girl. You'll always have a place with me." And in that moment I knew, whatever happened with Marin, I wasn't alone. The storm had shattered ties, but it had also revealed which ones were unbreakable. The salt air of Brighton felt different that morning, crisp, heavy, almost electric. I stood by my oven, pulling out trays of warm apple turnovers, when my phone buzzed. It was Jason. "Eleanor," his voice crackled with urgency, "you need to see this." It's all over the local news. My heart skipped. What is it? Not over the phone. Meet me at Harbor Lights. I wiped my hands on my apron, anxiety crawling through me, and hurried out. Claire had the television on behind the cafe counter when I arrived. A reporter's voice filled the room. Brighton Council confirms a crackdown on unlicensed food vendors. Stalls found without certification may face heavy fines and forced closure. Several market sellers are already under investigation. The screen flashed images, blurred faces, confiscated goods, inspectors in bright vests. And there, unmistakably, was Marin's stall. My stomach dropped. Jason placed a hand on my shoulder. They're saying she was reported for selling without proper licenses. Word is, she borrowed recipes but couldn't produce the paperwork. The inspectors shut her down yesterday. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The ground felt as though it tilted beneath me. My throat tightened. She tried to copy me, and now. Claire lowered the volume and stepped closer. This isn't your fault, Eleanor. She chose this. She tried to take shortcuts, and it caught up with her. But guilt gnawed at me anyway. Marin was my daughter, no matter how sharp her words, no matter how cruel her betrayal. That evening, I found Lila sitting on my sofa, her crutches propped nearby. She had seen the news too. Gran, she whispered, Mum's devastated. She's not talking to anyone. I hesitated, torn between the deep wound she had left me and the pull of maternal instinct. And you? How are you? Her eyes brimmed. I'm angry at her. But I'm also scared. She looks broken. I reached for her hand. Sometimes the ground has to disappear before we realize where we've been standing all along. She squeezed my hand back. Do you hate her? My chest ached. No. I hate what she's done. But she's still my daughter. And your mother. That will never change. The next morning, a knock rattled my door. When I opened it, Marin stood there, pale, her eyes red-rimmed. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, They find me, Mum. I owe more money than I can pay. People are laughing at me. I thought I could do what you do. But I couldn't. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I said terrible things to you. I pushed you away. I was jealous. Angry. But mostly, I was afraid. Afraid of being less than you. Afraid of Lila seeing me as weak. The rawness in her voice cracked something open in me. I stepped closer, my own tears blurring my vision. Oh, Marin, I whispered. I never wanted you to feel less. I only wanted you to see that life doesn't end when it gets hard. That we can still rise. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I pulled her into my arms, holding her the way I had when she was small, and scraped her knee. Maybe not. But I'll give it anyway. Because you're mine. And because forgiveness frees me too. For the first time in years, she clung to me, not as an adversary, but as a daughter. The days that followed were fragile, tentative. Marin came to the flat often, sitting quietly as I baked. Sometimes she apologized again, sometimes she only watched. The bitterness hadn't vanished, but it had cracked enough to let in a little light. One evening, as I pulled out a tray of cinnamon buns, she asked softly, Do you think you could teach me? Properly this time. Not to sell. Just to learn. I smiled, handing her a spoon. Start with the icing. And don't skimp on the sugar. She laughed. A small, genuine laugh I hadn't heard in years. Meanwhile, the seaside nook grew stronger than ever. With Jason's deliveries, Claire's cafe partnership, and even local shops stocking my bakes, I was no longer just the woman at the market. I was Eleanor, Brighton's baker, the woman who had refused to fade. But beyond the cakes and coins, it was the transformation in my family that meant the most. One Sunday, Lila sat at the table, homework spread out, while Marin carefully kneaded dough beside me. The radio played softly, the scent of baking filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, there was peace. I looked at them, my daughter, my granddaughter, and felt the ground steady beneath me again. Weeks later, at Harbor Lights, Claire asked me what I would name my story if it were a book. I thought of the humiliation at the party, the grape juice stinging my skin, the laughter. I thought of the silence that followed, the 3 days of aching solitude. And then I thought of the news that had shaken everything. News that had humbled Marin and cracked her heart open enough for healing. I smiled. I'd call it the ground beneath our feet. Because sometimes it has to crumble before we can rebuild it stronger. Claire squeezed my hand. Beautiful. And true. That night, as I sat by my window watching the moonlight ripple on the sea, I whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. For the second chance. For the strength I hadn't known I possessed. For the love that had survived spite and betrayal. Nobody wanted me there that night at the party. They mocked me, shamed me, cast me aside. But life had its own way of writing stories, and mine was not over. It was only beginning. Thank you for staying with Eleanor's journey, through humiliation, heartbreak, resilience, and reconciliation. If you felt her story touch your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe so you'll never miss more powerful life stories like this. And remember, no matter who doubts you, your story is still being written. My love. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.